Hi, my name is Andy Schmuckler. I'm a man on a mission. It's a mission that's got to do with whether human civilization is going to survive for the long haul, which I feel is sort of a toss-up right now. Um, this is my first YouTube video, and I'm making it because my son, who believes in my mission, told me that my generation communicates through writing, but if I want to reach the audience I really need to reach, I need to deal with the new media like a YouTube. So here I am. I've thought of calling this this very particular video an old man in search of a few good young minds. And the reason I'd be searching for a few good young minds is that what my life's work has been putting together a picture, what I'm calling the better human story, that I believe can help our species navigate our way into a sustainable future rather than destroying ourselves with some self-inflicted catastrophe. The thing about it is that it presents the story of our species in an importantly different light. It doesn't introduce whole new ideas about what the history has been. It just shows that we haven't understood what's been driving that history. And it puts into an importantly different light a variety of fundamental things about how we see the world, like how we understand ourselves as a species. Apropos of which I have as one of the things I think that I can pretty well prove that the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. It also puts into an importantly different light why our history has been as tormented as it has been. Another thing I think I can pretty well prove is that any species on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos that embarks on the path of civilization would be compelled or condemned to undergo a social evolutionary process as difficult and destructive as the one that human civilization has traced in the last, say, 10,000 years, certainly 5,000. And I think I can pretty well prove that. And it also puts into an importantly different light the challenges that we face as a species if we are going to be able to get our act together before we destroy ourselves. And in that respect, I think I can pretty well demonstrate that humankind and any species on any planet that embarks on the path of civilization would face as its central challenge this: to order its civilization well enough and soon enough that it can survive for the long haul instead of destroying itself. Now, one of the things about changing the way people think that, at least it's said in the field of studying the changes of scientific paradigms, like Einstein and displacing Newton, or Copernicus displacing Ptolemy, or we could make a list of major paradigm shifts. But it's said that the new way of thinking becomes widely understood in the civilization, or at least in that part of the civilization that thinks about whatever the matters are, is not, as I would have imagined growing up in my family, with intellectual integrity being sort of a central value. It's not that the people who believe the old way get persuaded by the evidence and logic that the old way needs to be discarded, or at least significantly modified. Rather, it's the passage of time changes the generations. The people who believed in the old way die off, probably going to their graves. Well, I mean, when you get to your grave, you're probably still not thinking, at least not that I understand. Go to their graves still believing what they always believed, while a new generation, or a couple of generations, comes up and adopts what some new insight shows to be true, or at least more true than the old way. So, given that ambition that I have, which is to get this better human story out into the world where I think it can do some real good, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to focus on talking to people like me. I'm the beginning of the baby boom, born in 46. And the people I went to college with, they're the same age as I am. And before long, before we get to the point where I'm hoping that this better human story might do some good, we will have left the scene. So I'm looking to reach a few good young minds with this better human story, because I'm imagining, based on that shift of paradigms thing that I've learned over the years, I'm imagining that the young minds are not so completely wedded to some other way of understanding the big picture that they can't apprehend a different way of thinking and absorb it if it passes muster for them in terms of showing it what's true. Parenthetically, I might say that I once had the experience of having a friend and a colleague who was a very major figure in the field of psychiatry, and who had written a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography and was connected with Harvard, and a very smart man I like to talk with about it a lot. Now, he had read the book back there, you might see, called The Parable of the Tribes, The Problem of Power and Social Evolution. That came out in 1984. It's still in print in a second edition. The University of California Press published it. He read it. He was very favorable about it. And when I was talking with him in his home about it a couple of years after it had come out, it came out in the process of that conversation that he had completely missed the the basic point, which is, well, I don't know, there's different ways of putting the basic point, but one of them was that you can't understand the human story simply in terms of human psychology, which was his bailiwick, psychiatrist. He was still understanding the destructiveness that got unleashed by our species as we became the first creatures on this planet to embark upon civilization. He couldn't understand how that could be except as a function of, oh, we are a very aggressive species. So that idea of the ugliness we see in human history isn't human nature writ large didn't compute, because he was thinking that understanding the whole meant understanding the nature of the parts, even though he had read and appreciated the whole book that I had spent 14 years trying to articulate as persuasively as I could. Even though he had read that thing, he was still thinking the way he always had thought, that the whole is nothing more than the sum of its parts. Whereas I think it's quite clear that there are systemic forces that can arise, and they arise in civilization. Because, well, let me define civilization in a way that sort of helps to bring into focus what's going on when a species does that. I define civilization, and having worked on this for 53 years now and counting, the most useful definition, I think, is those societies created by a species that has extricated itself from the niche in which it had evolved biologically. That calls attention to something really important. If you're the first species to embark on that path, that means you're the first species in the history of life on Earth to begin inventing your own new way of life. What our species did 10 or 12,000 years ago was unprecedented in the history of life, which goes back roughly 3.5 billion years. It creates a new situation. Everything else had been crafted by a process which is continually choosing what can survive for the long haul over what cannot. And that includes what can survive long enough to reproduce and to get its DNA out into the world. And also selection creates ecosystems or whole communities of entities or actors of some sort or other that interact with each other in a way which proves viable. I mean, you can talk about the world that life has evolved in as one that has lots of fits and starts. You know, we get asteroids slamming into a planet. We get ice ages coming and going. We get the movement of tectonic plates. We get episodes of great volcanic activity. These are all things that happen to the system of life on Earth, but not from within the system of life on Earth. There's nothing that's evolved to put in order where the asteroids are and what course they're going to take, and whether 66 million years ago one of them is going to slam into this planet. No, that can happen. The Earth could be obliterated, and that's why we're sending out these space things, like recently, to if we see an asteroid heading our way, to have a way of protecting ourselves. That's one of the ways in which life can protect itself, because it has a civilized species sitting here on the planet doing some amazing things. But never before did a species have the power that we now have to destroy itself and the whole living system. But that's because we should understand it as being because we as a species stepped out of a profoundly intricate natural order. The creature that extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically. That's the first. And we haven't spent the time to consider the implications of that. And that is actually fundamentally the starting point of my whole life's work, was that I was looking at things in an evolutionary perspective, and there was a day in 1970 when I saw the implications of our stepping out of the natural order. Oh, I don't think now is the time for me to go into that whole thing. Let me just promise that I think I can deliver those goods, prove those things that I said it proves. And that was the beginning of my life's work. And I've continued to sort of elaborate on it. In part, I've looked at the implications of what I understood back in 1970, and it got published in that book in 1984. But in part also, I've just looked through the evolutionary perspective and what it shows about important aspects of the human world. It becomes more multidimensional. It puts things like the moral dimension and the spiritual dimension into a different light. And I promise to you that I will show those in the course of a series that I'm assuming that I'm beginning here with you right now. And the question, looking for a few good young minds. So my son, who's obviously younger than I am, sent me a video about how to make your YouTubes. It was brilliantly done. Unlike this one, the guy knew exactly what he was going to say before he said it. I mean, he probably had said it, many times, but I was still very impressed. Anyway, one of the things he says is that, he has this thing about get started, get smart, and get good. Well, I'm started anyway. I'll do what I can to get good. He said, you got to identify your market. So I thought, and then you also have to differentiate yourself from those other people who are trying to get that market. And I thought to myself, well, in terms of competition, I really don't have to worry. There's really not much going on in the thinking culture of our times. It's competitive with what I'm saying I have to offer here. But the market was a whole lot more difficult a thing for me. That's where the issue, I think, comes from. I mean, the question is, he talked about people who are, you've got something, a lot of people have a problem of, like how to make a YouTube video. There are a lot of people who are interested in that, or how to live with, psoriasis, how to make a good impression on a first date. Things that a lot of people think about, or maybe they don't about. Maybe first dates are part of being an old guy, as you think about things in terms of dates. But anyway, there are a lot of people thinking about a lot of things, and I'm looking for people who, I don't know how widespread they are in terms of like being really motivated anyway. I mean, if you ask people, well, do you care whether humankind gets its act together in time to survive on this planet? Well, I mean, how many people are going to say, oh, I don't care? Well, I mean, there are some people like Rudy Giuliani say, well, why should I care about my legacy? I'm going to be dead. And then there's a famous line, well, why should I care about posterity? What has posterity ever done for me? But I expect that most people would say, yeah, I would like for us for our kind to continue on. And maybe they'd even be thinking about grandchildren. But, I think when you're talking about young people, I don't know how many people are thinking about their children and grandchildren. But anyway, I'm looking for people who really do care what the fate of human civilization is, uh, and care enough to do at least a little bit of work to understand what what the problem is. I mean, there's another book over here from the 2015 called "What We're Up Against." The destructive force at work in our world and how we can defeat it. I'll confess that I think I think I understand a lot about the destructive force we're up against. The how we can defeat it part is partly something that I think I do see, but partly I'm maybe it's a bit of puffery because I've been on this mission since that day in 1970. I saw something that just changed the course of my life. I mean, it shook my bones. I was on the verge of going to Yale University as a graduate student in American Studies, and all of a sudden there was something else that I was literally called to do. I mean, called in the sense I don't understand how it worked, but I made a promise. I didn't know what I was making a promise to, but I do keep my promises. I've never actually broken a promise that I know, and I think that that's probably accurate. I made a promise that I was going to do everything I could to articulate what I had seen and substantiate it. I mean, there's a long bibliography in that book. I mean, 33 pages of fairly close type, I was promised I would do everything I could to articulate it as persuasively as I could. And the first chapter of that book, I'll put a link onto it. You can read it for nothing. I mean, I wrote the thing many times, trying to come up with a way to lead the reader from what I believed was how most people think about things, relevant, to feel absolutely compelled to come to the conclusion that I wanted to lead the people to. So I felt that if I could do that, if I could present that idea in a clear and compelling way, and all my life up to that point, I mean, I was 24 at this point, was really geared toward enabling me to do that. I'll talk about my background some other time, but I'll put a link on a bio. I've got the background that I would have a hard time improving on the opportunities that I had to become somebody who might be able to bring that off. And anyway, I felt sure. I mean, I felt really sure, which shows this guy can be wrong. That if I were able to articulate that and get it out into the world, that's two things, that, I mean, the world was going to it was going to have a big impact. Let's just put it that way. I envisioned that when people started seeing things that way, there would be so much mental furniture that would get moved, that we would see ourselves and our whole human enterprise in a way which was, it didn't throw out other things, but it added something crucial to understanding what happens to a species that did what we did for the first time in the history of life 10,000 years ago. I was just so excited that I knew that what I was been planning to do was replaced by a new plan. And I got, I don't know if anybody be interested in my stories, but I'll tell you, if you take the road less traveled by, you see a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have taken if you took the road more traveled by. And up to the age, well, up until I uh, graduated from Harvard, and I'll throw in a little just because I'm afraid you're not going to take me seriously. I graduated summa cum laude, writing stuff that was um, more conventional in terms of it didn't challenge worldviews, but still of that enterprise of trying to put a lot of pieces together. Um, if you take the road less traveled, you get to see a whole lot of things you didn't know you were gonna, the way things were. I can tell you about my experience at Yale at some point, which was very disillusioning. My dad was a professor. He had, as I said, great integrity. Um, I mean, I just loved his integrity, and I love it all the more when I see how it isn't as I had imagined. This is how all the professors in the world are, that they really are interested in the truth. And but anyway, but the more puzzling and important uh, surprise for me was that ultimately, 14 years later, the book does come out. I feel like, and within what about 6 weeks, there's a full page review of it in the New York Times, and my publicist says to me, "Oh, that's the kind of review to die for, or was it to kill? I don't remember. It was suicide or homicide, but anyway, it got out there. That wasn't the only thing that happened, but." I'm 38 years old at this point, and I've gone through this long slog, and I feel like, hey man, I did it. All those things that happened, all those painful things that happened because I wasn't doing, jumping through the hoops that everybody else gave me. I mean, I did get my doctorate, but that's another story. Well, it got out there. It made a bit of a splash. And then I watched as over the course of a handful of years, maybe as many as 8 or 9 in the process, certainly by the early 90s, the idea had disappeared from the world. I still think about this often because it told me that however much I may have understood about the human story, there's stuff about the world I live in that I simply don't understand. The world I thought I lived in was one where if you put out something which makes some very bold claims and lays out some very strong assertions that, if they're valid, would have big ramifications, that is presented in a compelling way, and compelling was a word that several reviewers used about the book while I was making this splash before it disappeared. That the world would feel, obliged to either refute it or adopt it, which is what I was imagining was going to happen. I mean, I guess I'm something of an optimist, or naive in some ways, I guess. Or if it wasn't prepared to adopt it and it hadn't been able to refute it, at least to continue to struggle with it. And let me just say, nobody ever laid a glove on it. It wasn't refuted in any way. And let me just say also that, my dad was a professor of economics. It was something of a perfectionist is one way of putting it, but he wrote the first chapter of his book 9 times. So I've gone through these ideas multiple times. I mean, they were part of my PhD. Laying them out was part of my PhD written comprehensives at Berkeley, and oh, I wrote the book, and I went around to universities giving the talk. But more excitingly, I've just sort of walked the path and looked for for problems with it. Um, I think that it holds water. I just never find a way out of it. When I say something like any creature on any planet, will be compelled because of systemic forces, not because of its own nature, to uh, to enact a history to jump ahead, in which the spirit of the gangster is given by systemic forces a disproportionate role in shaping how its civilization will develop. That there's no way around it. But anyway, I'll be presenting that idea in a future. I just want to establish that a certain amount of credibility, because, well, if I were to hear somebody say, I say I'm a man on a mission. So I just started doing this, presenting this Better Human Story in a series of essays on a website, where I have a standing and a following, Daily Kos. It's not the kind of thing that Daily Kos is about. If I have a standing and a following, it's because I've been commenting about the crisis in America, which is what people there are focused on. Which fits into my Better Human Story in a very coherent way, by the way. But nonetheless, I don't have a lot of, I'm a pretty marginal guy. Um, I mean, I have my standings, but, compared to the ambitiousness of the piece that I started the series with was an introduction to a big picture view that might help human civilization survive. So that's the chutzpah of the whole thing, and I'm not comfortable with that. But I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to try to get attention. So the thing is, if this thing could have a beneficial impact on whether human civilization survives, just if, I know it sounds grandiose, but my problem is I actually do believe it because it really does hold water. If it is that at stake, and if my gut feeling is that we're in the ballpark of it being a toss-up, whether we're going to get our act together and create a better ordered civilization where something like a nuclear holocaust cannot end the whole experiment of that species and the experiment that life took by generating a civilization creating species. If that is something close to a toss-up, any beneficial impact could make a difference. You get to these tipping points, so straws break camels' backs. I make a certain claims. I claim that this is a big deal in terms of illuminating. I feel really solid about that. Yeah, I hope you'll check it out. But then I also make the claim about the beneficial impact. That is, I'm the guy who thought that if I got that book out, the world was going to have a beneficial impact in terms of its understanding. But after a few years, even though they didn't lay a hand on it, it just disappeared. So ideas, it's more complex than whether you can show something is true, that something that has important ramifications. If people believed it, there are issues about whether people are going to incorporate it into their understanding or not. What I believe is that if everybody had, the basic rudiments of what it is I'm going to present as my better if they had that big picture perspective in their minds, it would lead to feeling different about ourselves in a good way. I mean, we're better creatures than we thought ourselves to be. That really is something worth knowing. But also identifying the systemic forces, which is where I've done my analytic work and how they work. And it's important to know, book over here, what we're up against. The nature of the human drama is something that we don't really understand. There are some coherent forces at work that are going to determine which way it goes. And we should understand what those forces are. It starts with, something about what drives the way our civilization evolves. Over the last, let's see, I first saw something that does, I just sort of experienced this, evil, what the hell is that? Where is that coming from? But anyway, I'll tell that story sometime. Because in America today, we see some very dark things going on. So I started thinking about that stuff, and over the last, it's not quite 20 years, I guess, I've identified and can show that at the center of the human drama, not the whole center, but a big component of the center of the human drama is a battle between a couple of coherent forces over which is going to shape human destiny. That there is something you can see moving through the human world that consistently works to make the human world, more broken. That there are connections to be seen. And, I'll get to that. But anyway, so the better human story sort of becomes multidimensional. And it's been very exciting to continue to develop the implications of it. There's a lot to work through in an elaborate and carefully worked, coherent picture, a systemic view of how things have been and why they've been that way. That when I look for a few good young minds, people whose thinking is not rigidified, and people who care about whether human civilization gets its act together. Though for intellectual purposes, even if you didn't care about that, you might get off on, just seeing something put together. That I also want people who are willing to work hard enough to get at least the basic ideas so they understand them. Not like my Harvard psychiatry friend who read the book and didn't understand it. I'd like them to be people who are willing to do some work enough to have at least a perspective that they can look through. But especially I'm looking for a few young, good minds who really would want to understand, if it were true, those things I said about the ugliness in human history and how that's not a portrait of what we are. And to understand the systemic forces that are at work that are implied by a species having the creative intelligence that we were the first to have, that we could change the rules of our lives and not continue to do what our primate ancestors and our hunting-gathering ancestors had done. I think if we understand the forces that we're up against, and there's that book over there. By the way, that one's self-published. That's a story too. That we would not only feel better about ourselves and be stronger, because if we believe ourselves to be capable of better things, we're more likely to achieve it. I mean, expectations are very powerful. we live down to the expectations we have now to a large extent. But if the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large, then, which I think I can prove, well, the word prove, when you've got people who are famous for having tried to prove that 1 + 1 = 2, yeah, I should be careful about using the word. So, compellingly argue, I don't know. But if we are better creatures than we thought we were, we would understand that we really are capable of being better creatures. And we are capable of creating a better world. And we damn well better, because we are in considerable danger of failing as a species. So, one way I sometimes wonder if I can get people on board on this in terms of caring is I can present it in terms of success and failure. Because I say that every creature, and I don't know how, I'm guessing, because there are so many billions of galaxies and billions of stars in each one, roughly speaking, and all the planets that we now know, there are lots and lots of planets. There must be a lot of places, even if it's a very small percentage of places, that are suitable, because the Earth is so wonderfully calibrated to make us possible, apparently. There must be a lot of them. There must be a lot of them. And I think that I can prove, and this is something fun that I did in an essay, which maybe I'll put that link up too, called The Fate of Human Civilization. I think there's a whole population of I'm imagining. I imagine a cosmic historian's looking at the story of every civilization creating species, in the universe, however they gather their data. I don't worry about that, but that they look into this whole set of stories, that there will be some species that step onto the path of civilization, get into the same kind of challenges that we face, and succeed. That eventually the chaos, which I'll get into, the nature of that chaos, the force that gets unleashed by that, drives them into a lot of destruction for a long time, like we've been in. But gradually they understand what they're up against, and they bring it under control. And they continue in the long haul in a world in which a nuclear holocaust and isn't a possible outcome of the war of all against all that inevitably emerges with the civilization, and which they've learned how to live in harmony with the needs of the rest of the living planet, not having extricated itself from the natural order, but not becoming a bull in the ecospheric or biospheric China shop like we have with this climate change thing. So there will be some who will succeed, and then there will be some who have blown it. There will be species in whom the destructive force that emerges with civilization inevitably, and that's what I'm claiming to be able to prove, inevitability is very key to this. No way out. Okay, so the destructive force that inevitably emerges with civilization eventually wins the battle, and the species is unable to avoid some kind of self-inflicted catastrophe, war, or environmental. Okay, so this cosmic historian studies all these stories, and it sees some of these creatures as having got it together, and some as having failed to get it together, and then trying to identify, as a good social scientist would, what are the factors characteristic of the ones that made it, in contrast to the ones that blew it. And I've got some hypotheses about what the factors are, and they have implications for what steps we should be taking in our. So I do have some notion that there are ways to use this better human story to actually get ourselves on a path that's more likely to succeed. And I was saying that, maybe one way to pitch this, people who care about the future, but not that much. Well, people who are big on achieving, who really like success and like that. People who root for a football team and feel really great when they win the Super Bowl and feel downhearted when those 11 or 11 at a time guys that have really no connection with them succeed or fail to win. That, and I've got a lot of that in me, by the way, which is why I really don't like having failed at my mission. I don't like failure, never did. Got a lot of goodies early in my life for succeeding, so I got addicted to that stuff. Anyway, that I could say this better human story is something that you ought to really check out in a serious way, because what's at stake is whether our whole species, what a piece of work is man, says Hamlet, but man delights not me. This whole species, to look back at our story if we blow it as a failure. I mean, do you identify with the team? Well, I do. I mean, I'm troubled by a lot of what I see about humankind, particularly in America in these times. I live in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. Back in the 90s, I did hours and hours of talk radio with the traditional conservative Republican, highly Christian, somewhat fundamentalist people of the region, and I loved them. And it's been very hard for me to see where they've been led to. And that's also part of the better human story. But if you care about succeeding, and you don't like the idea of our species blowing it, maybe that'd be a source of motivation to check it out. Does this guy deliver what he says? Is it really even plausible that he might deliver what he? I will say more about plausibility another time. I hope by now I'm at least credible enough. But there is still a question. Well, what about getting these ideas out into the world? Well, first of all, when I say I'm a man on a mission, one thing to say is I'm 77. That number impresses me as being rather large. It's the oldest I've ever been. But I mean, I qualify as an old man. I don't feel all the ways that old men do. Not yet, is how I look at it. I'm watching what's happening to other people I know, and I know where the road leads. So what drives me at this time in my life is that I recognize that what I've achieved about getting this better human story out there isn't nothing. I mean, I do have, but it is way short of, in a particular way of fulfilling the ambition. The particular way is there are some pieces of it out there that are out there. They may not be doing a whole lot, in terms of being really a big, a part of the way the world thinks about things, enough to have any real influence. I don't think I have any real influence. I don't think well, not at that level. But there are a lot of parts of it that I think I'm the only one that's, really gotten their thinking. There are people who have read a lot of my stuff, but I don't think that what is out there is such that if I died tonight, which I'm not expecting. If I die tonight, but there are a finite number of nights left, it would simply disappear from the world with me. I mean, I'm an optimist, but my dad was a guy who said, let's look the facts in the face. Let's grab the bull by the tail and look the facts squarely in the face. He was not an earthy guy, but he liked earthy expressions. I don't think there's any plausible future right now where major parts of the integrative vision that I've spent 53 years putting together would be out there available to do any good. Now, that book was probably, it came out paperback from Houghton Mifflin. People have probably sold them at yard sales and or thrown them out when they moved, but there are probably a lot of them still on people's bookshelves. And someday, somebody might pull a book off the shelf and say, "Oh my!" So that's the story. I like to think that. But that's right now, I think that is about 1/6 of the whole thing that I've tried to convey. An integrative vision, a better human story, something that shows some important parts of the paths that we need to take and that reconnects us with some important parts of our being, the moral and spiritual passions that the secular worldview, I talk a lot about the secular worldview because I'm part of that, but it, in its present form, has some major limitations, and there are several of those limitations that I'm trying to fill, the void, that will make it better if we're understanding things that way, that we understand that, well, I don't know if I should go here, but judgments of value are not merely subjective. It looked at in an evolutionary perspective, you can see that value is real, it is important, and it is life-serving. By the way, I can do the same thing with the dimension of spiritually transformative experience. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. But those two I can show in an evolutionary perspective, a different idea. It doesn't come right out of that. Not like the central drama. That does come right out of that. I can show that the spiritual dimension is real, important, and life-serving in ways that the general secular culture doesn't recognize. So, stick with me. I say I never broke a promise. Maybe I'm going out on a limb. I'll go out on a limb because I really believe it. I mean, I've been looking. Well, I promise that I'm going to deliver. What is the power of ideas, and what is the ambition that I've got in seeking out a few good young minds? I'll take the old ones too if I can get them. This is how I look at it when I look at my ambition in the light of what I know about what's happened with ideas. When I was growing up and getting educated, there were two thinkers that provided perspectives through which, on the human world, through which a goodly number of people, there was sort of these concentric circles around both Marx and Freud. They're the two guys. There was a particular small group of people who, in a sense, formed a kind of a culture or a society of people who really looked into and worked to master what their thinker provided as a perspective, and to apply it to understanding things around them, whether it was Marx's idea of the class struggle or Freud's idea about repression in the unconscious or whatever. There were Freudians and there were Marxians. And then there were, around that circle, there was a larger circle of people who didn't go into it that deeply, but could write a blue book essay about either Freudian or Marxian theory. Basically had the overall structure. And then there, out beyond that, there was a group of people, the wider culture, the whole culture. I mean, I love old movies, and I watch movies from the 40s and the 50s, and I can see, especially with Freud in this case, back then he was a very powerful figure in the academic world, but also in the culture at large. So that there are a lot of movies where basically you can't understand their perspective without understanding that they were influenced by the Freudian emanations in the culture. I haven't seen anything bigger than that happen. So whatever I think of what I've put together, and you can see, I'm not interested in, well, anyway, I honestly just think what I think. So my ambition is is for this better human story to become as infiltrated into the wider thinking of the civilization as one could see happen with those thinkers. Right now, by the way, and this is something I'm going to talk about sometime, I don't see anybody. I mean, Freud and Marx have fallen into relative disfavor compared to what they were like when I was going to high school and college. But I don't think there's anybody out there who's occupying that kind of a space. And I'll just say, I don't think that's irrelevant to what happened when my book actually came out into the world and then got ignored after making a bit of a splash and nobody ever refuting it. Maybe I'll deal with that issue again sometime, but I'm still puzzled, exactly what the reason was. Is it the content? People said to me, "Oh, Andy, you're just ahead of your time," and we know that expression. I'm not sure what it means. But anyway, my ambition is for this perspective, which can be fit onto not bumper sticker. Well, I mean, the ugliness that we see in human history is not human nature writ large. I mean, that's a one sentence deal. I mean, if everybody understands that and they stop thinking in terms of human depravity and original sin, and whenever anybody says something about human nature, you'll notice they're always pointing towards something unpleasant, some kind of defect. So even if people don't believe in original sin, we're carrying some kind of burden which we could just as well do with that. But if people the wider culture can absorb an idea, but only if at the center there's enough power to emanate the idea out into the culture, which was true for Marx, which was true for Freud, which has not been true for Schmuckler in any way. But that says something about the highest quality, good young minds that I'm looking for, which is the kind of people who, if it did hold water, if the perspective that it provided really did illuminate a lot of fundamental questions, would be willing to do the work like the people who studied Freud's ideas. By the way, he was a thinker I got most deeply into in my teens and early 20s. I was never a big fan of Marx's, but I studied him. But there were people who really delved into them. So I'm looking for people who, if the goods that I'm promising were to be delivered, it would be for them worth really understanding, not just, oh, I get the bumper sticker. So that's ultimately that's the primo. Anybody who's interested in even in getting also the, I could write a blue book about it after I wrote. I want those minds too, which I want them to check it out. And anybody who's just watching this and isn't going to do any work, well, please just follow this series. Or if you don't, maybe I leave you with the thought that we could understand ourselves better, and it would be to our interest to have a picture of the whole, to see how things fit together, to see what we're up against, not to understand things just in pieces. I don't know, maybe there's a better message to leave people with. Anyway, that's what this is about. I'm an old man who recognizes that if I'm going to achieve this mission, and if I really believe that it could matter, and I really do care about human future, who the hell am I to say, okay, well, I've reached 77, I've worked at it for a long time, I'm going to quit, I'm going to take it easy. Well, I should be doing this. I should be giving it everything I got. It may be the fourth quarter, I may be down 2 touchdowns, but is there some way that it might yet be accomplished? I'll try whatever it takes. And I'm very grateful to my son for pushing me in this direction. The rigidification takes many forms, and it's practically a joke that my generation, for the most part, needs its children and grandchildren to help them with the new technologies. He's going to help me get this stuff up and attract an audience and things that a world that I'm working to become acclimated to. But this makes sense for me to do, and I hope that that I've managed to say there's something on offer here of value, enough that before jumping to any conclusions that it's not really there, because how believable is that you check it out. This is an invitation into a process of getting a better human story that might help human civilization to survive for the long haul and not destroy itself. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it.